Hey everyone, welcome to another deck recap video. Today we're going to be recapping Simic Typhoon Control. So, like the Izzet version of this deck, so Izzet Typhoon Delver, I didn't make that many changes. Well, with Izzet version I changed nothing. With this version, I didn't change anything except for the permission package. So let's take a look at the permission package. But before we do, actually, just a quick note, I'm not going to be going in depth on this deck in this video. There is a deck that I posted 2 weeks ago. I'll link that in the description of this video, and it'll also be a link at the end of the video as well. So check out the deck tech. I go into detail about the deck, why I built it, and how it works. And also check out the matches if you want to see some gameplay footage as well. But the recap videos are really meant to, share my final thoughts on the deck before I move on to a new brew, and to give you my thoughts on, competitive viability, where it works, where it doesn't work, and what changes I would make in the future. So permission, yeah. I didn't do much for permission except that I think Stubborn Denial was a very poor miss on my part. I think Stubborn Denial should have been in the deck in the first place, and I can't even believe I didn't consider it. Considering I do play Stubborn Denial in Temur Delver, and I think that Stubborn Denial is an obvious include because all of your creatures except Noble Hierarch, which doesn't really count, trigger Ferocious, right? So your Tarmogoyfs are almost always 4/5. Your Storming Entities become 4/4s as you cast Stubborn Denial, which means Ferocious will be active, and Euro is a 6/6. So that's all you need to know about Euro. Keeping that in mind, for Stubborn Denial is actually amazing because it's essentially I misspoke there. It's an amazing card because it's essentially a 1 CMC counter target non-creature spell. And in Modern, that is super relevant. It allows you to be a bit more aggressive with your resource usage because you just need to keep, let's say, 1 blue mana up to, pass a turn and then be able to counter anything that your opponent's going to play. So, yeah, Stubborn Denial was what was a big miss here. So I played around with the composition of Force and Negation. I removed 1 Force and Negation, and I removed the 2 Archmage's Charms that I started with. I got rid of those. I don't really think they fit well on this deck anyway, and I put in 3 Stubborn Denial, and I think this composition is a lot better. You still want to have 2 mana leaks, just to have a bit more of a wider answer to creature spells, for example, or any other spell that you might think of, but creature spells in particular, because Force and Negation and Stubborn Denial don't touch creature spells. So that was really it in terms of changes I made to this deck. I mean, I obviously played around with the sideboard a lot, but overall, that was pretty much it. I was really happy with this deck. I had a lot of fun with it. It was really powerful. Like, usually when I'm grinding, it'll be like 50-50. I'll lose 50% of my games. I'm adjusting, so it's normal. Like, I'll change as I go. But with this deck, and especially with the Izzet version where I changed nothing, but with this deck, I changed almost nothing. And I lost very few. I think I was closer to 70% win percentage. That does not mean that this deck is broken. So please don't take that, don't take it. I'm not trying to say that this deck is the win all be all. What I'm trying to say is that in my personal experience with the deck, I won a large percentage of my games, and I played at least 30 to 40 matches, which is what I usually do with every deck that I play. So just keep that in mind. Let's move on to the matchups. Starting with combo, I actually think that you're pretty well positioned with combo, mostly thanks to Stubborn Denial and Force and Negation, of course, but Stubborn Denial really being there. If you're playing a lot more combo heavy, especially spell-based combos, combo spells like Storm, you could up your Stubborn Denial count to maybe 4, and maybe you can even get rid of your mana leaks altogether and just play Force and Negation and Stubborn Denial. Those two together would shut down basically any spell-based combo. Combo decks like Titan, Amulet Titan, those will be a bit harder, at least main board, so you won't have any obvious answers to Primeval Titan and a lot of the other creatures that your opponents play. The best thing you have is essentially Vapor Snag. In the sideboard, you could bring in Spreading Seas. You don't have access to Blood Moon, obviously, in Simic, but Spreading Seas can do the job of at least turning off key lands that you don't want to do anything, and that might help you out. Of course, you could bring in other sideboard tech as well if you really need to worry about Amulet Titan, but yeah, I mean, I don't think it's overpowering the meta right now, but if it is in your particular meta and you really want to try this deck out, I think your sideboard's going to be your big friend here. Moving on to aggro, so I think against aggro you're I was about to say pretty good, but then I'm forgetting that your removal sucks. So Yeah, it's really going to depend. Your creatures are big, generally speaking, and you can get them out pretty quickly. But the problem is your removal sucks, right? So you have access to Vapor Snag, and your sideboard can pack in more creature removal, quote unquote. But we all know that blue pretty much stinks at removing creatures, and by definition, green also is pretty good at removing creatures with spells. You're supposed to be doing that more. Blue, you're supposed to be countering the creature, and green, you're supposed to be just killing the creature or whatever, blocking it because you're bigger. So, yeah, that's going to be a problem you're going to have to overcome. If you're in a meta where decks go wide often, yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, again, you could always pack more Vapor Snags. You could always pack, Entrenching Melodies or other types of creature bounce effects or control effects in your sideboard, and that would probably give you a better chance. But yeah, keep that in mind. It's going to be a bit tricky with aggro decks. I wouldn't say it's your worst matchup, but it's tricky. Let's move on to big mana decks. So I think you're less well positioned with big mana decks than you are with the Izzet version, mostly because you just don't have Blood Moon. Now, generally speaking, you don't really need Blood Moon to shut down Tron, right? You just need one Spreading Seas on one Tron piece, and you're good. But that's assuming that your opponent doesn't have a backup for that Tron piece, right? And that's usually not the case, especially mid to late game. So you are overall less effective against big mana decks. Now, what helps is that your creatures are relatively big, so you won't have too much trouble dealing with Eldrazi. But the point is, I mean, can you deal with them? Because they might be pumping out just too much value with their mana generation. So, gonna be a tough matchup. You're gonna probably have to rely a lot on your counter spells to counter, their Karns or anything else that's non-creature, like Planeswalkers. But if it's a more Eldrazi heavy version of Tron, yeah, it's going to be a bit tricky. I would say, thanks to your ability to have a 1 mana counter spell, essentially, for a lot of their spells, their Planeswalkers, I think you're going to be, I would say 40-60 in their favor, which is not bad. Unless you're playing in a meta that's super heavy on Tron, in which case it might be tricky. I would switch to Izzet perhaps and get a bit better luck there. But it really depends. If you're really comfortable in this type of shell, then maybe you can deal with Tron decks all day long with this deck, and that'll be okay. Let's move on to not Magic. So yeah, I mean, this is gonna be similar to what I would be saying in the Izzet recap video. It is what it is. You're gonna have to race them. Your creatures are big. Consistently, so having a Tarmogoyf or a Storming Entity or a Euro on the battlefield is going to help you at least repel the attacks that your opponent will be throwing at you. But the point is you need to repel them, right, and relatively quickly. So if your opponent just vomits out their graveyard in turn 1 or 2, and then they have like 6 creatures on the battlefield, in the first 2 turns, well, there's not much most decks can do to deal with that, right? That's just what not Magic does. But assuming your opponent has a slightly less insane start, if you're pumping out your creatures and you are saving your counter spells for their larger payoff spells from their graveyard, then you might actually be able to fare pretty well. I think, again, the tipping point here is that your creatures are pretty big, and I've designed a deck to have large Tarmogoyfs often, and Shark Typhoon also helps in terms of putting more bodies on the battlefield, but realistically speaking, you're going to be facing off with your Tarmogoyf, your Storming Entity, or your Euros. So I think that's how you're going to deal with Dredge. Oh, sorry, I said Dredge. I slipped that. I meant not Magic. So Control, yeah, Control. Listen, you are playing like more of a Control shell, so you can probably go face toe to toe with a Control deck a lot better. With the Simic version, I know I had more luck with the Simic version as well. I mean, your one downside is that your artifact removal, again, is going to be kind of spotty. There are green spells that deal with artifacts, so you're going to have to probably lean on those in your sideboard. But apart from that, I think you have a relatively good matchup either way. If they go with the nuts with their Stoneforge Mystic and you have no answer, that's going to be a problem. But again, your creatures are big. You have a lot of counters. You have Veil of Summer in the sideboard as well to bring in to deal with their counter spells. So, you know, things, relatively speaking, should be in your favor oftentimes. But it's going to be a long game. It's going to be a long match when you're playing against control. Just keep that in mind, because you are also playing a control-ish deck, so it's going to play out. Just experience. I'm letting you know from now. Keep that in mind. Mid-range, last but not least. I think we are just fine. We're not great. We're not poor. Mid-range might have the upper hand. What's really going to be hurting us with mid-range is that they have, you know, especially Jund, they have access to all the good removal, and you have access to essentially no good removal, and that's probably what's going to tip the scale. So the question is, can they find that removal in time, and do you have any answers when that removal comes down? If you do, you're going to do just fine against mid-range. If you don't, you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer. So yeah, keep that in mind. I would say it's 50-50. If you're really good with the deck, you put in your repetition, you could probably play around, and you know what your decks you're playing against, you could probably win more often than not. But yeah, again, you're really going to die to the lack of good removal on your end and the abundance of good removal on your opponent's end. And that's pretty much it for the matchup summary. So overall, I really enjoyed playing with this deck. I feel that Shark Typhoon, at the end of the day, I just want to play decks with Shark Typhoon in them. I want to see how it was, and I did not want to play with 25 lands. I didn't want to play a full-on, fully committed control deck. I wanted to play something that was slightly controlled, a bit more tempo, a bit more aggressive, that played more than like 4 creatures, and this and the Izzet version are what I came up with. And I like this cycling ability of Shark Typhoon. I almost always use Shark Typhoon cycling ability over just full-on casting it. And having that extra 1/1 or 2/2 flying shark or 3/3 flying shark on the battlefield does make a difference, right? So, I mean, you have nothing else to do with your mana mid-game or late game. Dump it all into cycling Shark Typhoon, get a big flyer in the air, and now your opponent has to deal with that as well. And you can just win the game. And I've won plenty of games because Shark Typhoon gave me that extra 1/1 or 2/2 to seal off the game to the turn after. Simple as that. Or you cycle end of your opponent's turn, you untap, attack with everything, and you win. It's another vector of attack that your opponent usually doesn't consider, and you can. And worst case, it becomes a pitch spell to force a negation, and that's that. Or it's filling up your graveyard and making your Tarmogoyf even bigger faster. So I think it has value overall. Do you need to play with Shark Typhoon? No, but you don't need to play many things in many decks. But you do anyway because it's fun, and you want to win, and you want to win in interesting ways. So yeah, I would give this deck a try. I think you would enjoy it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter. I appreciate all of that. I appreciate all of you for subscribing and watching my content. And a big thank you to my patrons. My Patreon is slowly growing, and I'm looking forward to expanding perks and features for my patrons in the near future. So stay tuned for that. If you want to support me on Patreon, there's a link in the description, or just go to patreon.com/DelverBrews. I have a few tiers, and if you have any thoughts on how I can improve those tiers, I'd love to hear them. Thanks, and have a good one.